This is Yakkin with Nick, and you're yakking with me, and today we're yakking with Brian Sovryn of Sovryn Tech. How you doing today?
Oh, doing great, Nick. It's great to be on the show.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the work that you've done. I'm not a Sovryn Tech listener. I have to admit, I'm not a techie guy. I'm kind of a Luddite. I live in a trailer that has 2 outlets and runs on propane. So
well, I'll tell you though, Nick. If you did listen to my show, you'd end up living the same exact way. So, on a long enough timeline, I think everybody runs off to a cave after you listen to enough tech news. So don't worry about it. You're doing it right.
Good. Well, that's awesome. But so, can you tell us where? Well, I guess I wanted to say this. I really enjoyed the work that you've done on the School Sucks project, especially that Empathon series that you and Dr. Stephanie Murphy did with Brett Venant was really great, and it I actually changed my outlook on life, and it's still kind of like I could see it playing out, where I kind of felt like I was a little bit more conservative, and then he had you guys, like I was listening to him, and it seemed like Brett was moving that way too. But then after listening to the three of you talk, I started realizing actually I'm a little bit progressive, aren't I? So it was really really refreshing to hear you guys on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We definitely get, Stephanie and I, full disclosure, we're partners. We often get, we're individuals and we think individually. We don't even agree 100% on everything, I don't think. But yeah, we definitely, that whenever we're on School Sucks, to some degree, there's always kind of that bit of contingent of the listenership there that gets a little pushback. But then there's some people who are like, well, actually, maybe they have a point. And I always like to hear that. So I appreciate you saying that, Nick.
Yeah, totally. And I also really like your Facebook posts. I follow you on Instagram and Facebook. Oh, man, it's just hilarious.
It's funny. I hear that so often. I don't want to get lost in the weeds on that, but I hear that so often. But I get, in comparison, I guess maybe to some other Facebooktarians or, the people that have a really big online presence. Like I don't get anywhere near, I guess you could say the social metrics that they do. But every time somebody says something, it's like, oh my God, I love your Facebook post. Just a funny thing. So anyway, yeah, thank you for that as well. I enjoy entertaining people and hopefully people don't take me too seriously on what I say, online. But, either way, people enjoy it. So it's good.
Yeah, totally. And while, people are listening to this, where could they, look you up?
Oh yeah. So, the best site to go to is just sovryntech.com, SOVRYN tech.com. And that has all the links, even though it goes to a Patreon page. I kind of use it as my home page because everything I can put everything there, and all of my various links for Twitter and Facebook and whatever else, they're all available right there. So
cool. And I will link that in the show notes, and
sure.
We'll bring it up again at the end of the show. Yeah, cool. And I wanted to talk to you because one of your Facebook post, I don't actually remember this article. I didn't read it, but you were kind of criticizing Stoicism. I think it had to do with monogamy and how the Stoics created that. Was that true?
Yeah. So the article was from the BBC, and it was actually titled "The Invention of Heterosexuality."
Okay.
And it's a lengthy read, so I don't blame anybody for not reading it. It's really long. And yeah, its premise is that, a lot of these concepts, of what we think of as marriage, family, heterosexuality, a lot of this different stuff really is a very recent, invention. Even on the order of just a century ago. And I think it made a really, really good case about it. So yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. But it was interesting because I knew that you were into hedonism, but I didn't know that you were really you had some concerns with Stoicism. But I'm a big fan of Stoicism, and I've talked about it a lot on this show. And I saw that, and I thought, well, man, I have to talk to Brian about this because this is really interesting, and I've never actually seen somebody go after Stoicism much. Occasionally, I get people who are resistant to the idea because, I don't want to shut off my emotions, and well, I don't think that Stoicism is that, but then, that happens a lot.
Sure.
But this was your criticism was more interesting, I thought. And just bringing up that article and saying, yeah, see, I told you that Stoics were a problem or something. I don't remember what you said, but I thought it was really interesting. So I decided, well, I got to talk to him about this, and I want to flesh out the differences in kind of our outlooks on that, because I think that, at least what I've found in my limited experience, is that most people really agree on fundamentals, and then usually it's semantics or just minor differences. So I don't think that you're an enemy because you're not Stoic, right? But yeah, so I'd just like to explore that. And
Sure.
yeah, I'd like to know what how do you define, I guess, hedonism? Because that seems to me like it's, I don't know if it's, I don't want to say it's the opposite of Stoicism, but they're definitely opposed. I think they're both. I don't know exactly where the philosophical roots of hedonism are, but I know Epicureanism has some similarities, and I know that Epicurus and the Stoics were not big fans of each other.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you're right in that there's actually a lot of ideas that Stoics and hedonists share. Like if you read, so kind of the two main, and I'll define hedonism for myself in a second, but like when you read sort of, I guess, I mean, it's debatable what are the major works. Some people, as far as Stoicism goes, I mean, and I like to think I'm fairly fluent in Stoicism, at least the historical Stoicism. I know there's some people that kind of have a more modern thought on it. But, some people go with like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations as being the major text. I've always found that with Stoicism, the major text was really Epictetus, the Manual for Living, the Enchiridion. And then for the hedonists, I think a lot of people, or at least the Epicureans, which not every hedonist is an Epicurean, would probably go with like The Art of Happiness by Epicurus. In those two books, you have a lot of very similar solutions, shall we say, for how to live a good life. I mean, Enchiridion a very short book. It's only it has 30 little maxims or 30 some odd maxims in it, of what to do and everything. And so there's a lot of things in that I actually really like, and that again would also agree with hedonism in a lot of ways. So I think you're accurate in saying that, and that's why I don't necessarily see them as, see hedonists and Stoics as enemies, as an us versus them. It's two different, well, we can get into where I think the differences lie, but for me, hedonism is just very simply that happiness is that is the purpose of life, or of the human condition of human life, is to achieve happiness. I mean, and it's really, quite simply that basic, and just, how that gets applied, how that ends up taking shape in one's life is usually in making the choices that allow for the maximum amount of choice, because I think that's the only way you can actually achieve happiness is through having the maximum amount of choice. Some people call it ethical hedonism. That's a phrase that gets tossed around because there's lots of there's lots of different types of hedonism. There's like medical definitions for hedonism or transhumanist definitions of hedonism, where literally you are trying to create chemicals and drugs and all these other things that are designed to completely 100% eliminate pain. Now, your run-of-the-mill hedonist wouldn't agree with that at all. That's a very specific type of hedonism. So sometimes you need to put a word in front of it, kind of like when people talk about anarchism, they like to put, something after the hyphen or whatever. But yeah, I mean, so if I needed to get pared down, I would definitely fall under, I guess, more of an ethical hedonist, maybe not even so much an Epicurean, an Epicurist or whatever. But yeah, so does that definition sit well?
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and I have to say that I don't think I have any issue with that. For
Sure.
my exploration of philosophy, when I come into ethics, the idea I think behind ethics is how do you live the best life you can live, and the conclusion that I have found is that that I'm trying to find happiness, right? I'm trying to and what I don't know how exactly we can define happiness. I think it's I don't really know what the definition is, but I'm trying to find fulfillment and enjoyment. Right at the end of my life, I want to be able to look back and say, "Hey, that was fun,"
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's a misconception, right? Like you said, that it's that it can be kind of shallow. Like, hey, we just want happiness, so let's take this pill that just makes us happy forever. That's a very shallow look at pleasure, I think, and happiness. And I think that there's more. And so that's I would say that in that sense that maybe I'm an ethical hedonist. But that's why I study, Stoicism and trying to practice Stoicism. That's kind of my thought. And I'll give my kind of definition of Stoicism.
Sure.
So we can kind of balance it off. Because my idea is that basically, I think that Stoicism is trying to live in accordance with nature or fate, right? Trying not to just try not to control what you can't control. That's what I break it down to. And I've never read the Enchiridion or Meditations or Seneca. I've never read any of those. So I would say I'm more of a modern Stoic, just kind of going off these basic principles that I've pulled off of what people have talked about. So that's kind of where I come at that from.
Yeah, that concept of not controlling what you can't control, not trying to. That's an area where certainly hedonists and Stoics, regardless of what brand, I think would actually largely agree. So when I hear that definition of Stoicism, I'm like, okay, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And to want to feel fulfillment, to want to feel, at the end of your days that, oh, that was a good life. And that's really what both of these schools, I think, historically were trying to do is how do you get at the end and feel perhaps accomplishment or feel like, this was good. I did this right.
Sure. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that it's because I actually have a lot of criticisms that I'm sure you might share with Stoicism. Like, I'm not into the idea of duty, right? I don't think that obligations are I don't know. I just don't think that unless you say, "Hey, I have this obligation and I'm going to make this," I'm not going to. I don't think you should be obliged. Obliged. I don't know when you say obliged. I think it's obligated.
Yeah, obligated would be the word.
Okay. I think that unless you specifically say, I'm going to do this, that you shouldn't really be stuck to this set of ethics that somebody made up, if it was 100 years ago or whatever, just because the culture buys into it.
Right.
And would you say that that's kind of a large concern that you have with Stoicism?
Yeah, so that's really gets at the crux of where I think Stoicism has kind of an issue, because like I said, there's a lot of things that when you read various texts, they pretty much agree with each other, but when Stoicism comes into play, there is this notion of that duty. I mean, like Stoicism. So I was in the U.S. military for a couple of years, and Stoicism is historically very popular, in the military, because it's all about kind of, eschewing the present pain and, getting to the gain later, I guess, things like this. And yeah, there is that sense of duty that it kind of calls it, or not calls it, that it brings up I don't know, not unconsciously, because it's there, it's in the writing, but I don't know, it seems very appealing to people who are in positions where they feel like, that they have a duty for things. And so anyway, bottom line is that, Stoicism seems to have this, or not seems, like it has this notion that there is a tomorrow. You need to be thinking the long term in the future. But the thing is, it's not just your long term future that it's talking about. I mean, like, there's a reason that Stoicism becomes very popular with people who have families, is because, like there's this idea that, oh, you got to take care of your kids. You got to leave the world better than when, than when you came into it. There's a lot of this right out of the gate, this idea that you are here, you're in this world, and you want to feel a personal sense of fulfillment, but that sense of fulfillment comes from, constantly thinking about the future and even like thinking outside of yourself. And that's where my main issue, comes in. I don't know if I explained it the best there, but that's where, like, suddenly I'm like, oh, no, and this is where the hedonists would defer is that, no, it's your life. You don't need to be thinking about everybody else. It doesn't mean that you don't. We have very basic biological universals, frankly, as human beings, like empathy and stuff like this, that, kind of inherently causes you to, to care about other people. But to think that you need to worry about any effect of what you do on a time that you will never see, after you pass away, whatever that is, or that there's an obligation to carry on life and all of this. I mean, that's where it turns into not a philosophy that, feels freeing, but it turns into a philosophy that feels like, a very controlling one, and saying that, that you have obligations, that there's things you have to do, to just allow the order of life and to allow everybody else maybe even to have an enjoyable life or something like this. And so that's kind of where my main issue comes in. I mean, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I think I largely agree. That's largely my criticism of, especially ancient Stoicism and a lot of the ways that people practice it today. I don't like the idea of having that kind of obligation, and I definitely agree that, I'm living my life for me, and I hope to someday have a family, and at
Sure.
that time, maybe I will change my kind of outlook, and I'm definitely, I definitely think that I would be more, I don't want to say selfless, but be more, taking that group of people, taking their interests, much larger into my own interests, if that makes sense. I'm looking out for them, because I'm trying to, pass on my genes and pass on these things I know, whatever it is, whatever those motivations are, I don't have them now, so I'm not really concerned with them, but, I don't think that really comes from a sense of obligation necessarily. I kind of think if I'm going to have a kid, I better take care of it because they didn't really ask me to come here, right?
Sure.
And that's different, but I get what you're saying, because I think in that situation, maybe the duty applies, and I see where people are attracted to it, but I largely think that, that if you're practicing a philosophy and even just, if you're doing things that aren't freeing, then you're limiting yourself. And as a libertarian, right, that's kind of where I come from. That's what I like. I like freedom. And in a lot of cases, I think that, that sense of duty and the sense of obligation can be harmful. If you're into that thing, and if you want to, take the freedom that you have and decide to pursue that path, I think that's great for you. But I would say that I definitely agree more so with you, that it can be, a large problem. And I think that Stoicism can be used, in a harmful way. And I think it's very important to recognize that, right? That there are, that just because you call yourself a Stoic doesn't mean you're a great person, or that you're living the best life, or that, and just because you call yourself a hedonist or whatever it is, doesn't mean that you're a good person. Because everybody can take these ideas and interpret them in their own way. It's the same thing with Christianity, same thing with political philosophies. Nobody really, it's hard to say that these things are black and white, right? And usually it comes down to some nuance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I think it'd be good to bring up like the points where I've seen, a couple of things. I mean, one would be, say, maybe just a little bit more touching on the history of like hedonism. Like Epicurus, Epicureanism and all that, in most religions, Christianity, Judaism, a bunch of them, I mean, pretty much in fact, I can particularly say for Judaism, like if you consider, like say you were a Jew, you were a practicing Jew, right, in a religion, and this could be, 1,000 years ago, however long ago. If you took on, if you said, no, all right, I'm an Epicurean now, okay, like I'm following the teachings of Epicurus, I become a hedonist and all this. Like that is one of the kind of, in the Jewish sense, an unpardonable sin. Like that's terrible. You can't do that. That's dead wrong, and you get excommunicated effectively from Judaism. Christianity holds similar, concepts where, look, if you buy into what hedonism says, we're kicking you out. We can't have this. It's the devil. And I think the interest for me, and I want to bring in more modern examples here in a second. I mean, for me, what that brings up is that considering that, at least in my opinion, religions, Judaism, Christianity, and others are very controlling social structures, and they're not freeing, in my opinion. I think that because they see hedonism as such a terrible thing, that it's because they recognize either consciously or unconsciously, this is going to get rid of our control over society. This is going to get rid of our control over the community, in all of this. So that makes it appealing to me, even just in that way, even though, maybe they're not connected, right? That could be a fallacy because maybe those two things aren't connected at all. But to bring up like a modern example, like where I suddenly see people, and of course I'm not talking about you, Nick, or I can think of a few names, but whatever, names aren't important. But where I see a lot of people start getting interested in Stoicism, like suddenly they're just, all about Stoicism and all this. It's interesting the points where they come up. In my past, like I said, I was in the U.S. military. Suddenly everybody gets really interested in this concept of Stoicism. I mean, and there's like books like, laid around in barracks and all this stuff where you can learn about Stoicism there. And certainly I see Stoicism in those, in the military, it's a coping strategy for, trying to make sense of, just like religion, where it's trying to make sense of really, in my opinion, the horrendous things you're doing when you're in the military. And just trying to make sense of this whole life. The other places that I see it, and this has been even very recently, is with new families where, say the mother or whoever, suddenly, they have this kid and suddenly they're very, very interested in Stoicism. And I think the reason that is because they are losing, they're trying to find that coping mechanism for the fact that maybe they feel like they got a raw deal. Now, I'm not saying having a family is a bad thing. I'm not saying having kids is some kind of torture or something like that. I mean, it can be a very beautiful thing. But it's interesting that suddenly a lot of people that get very interested in this stuff are often people that are going through something very trying in their life, or, something very, something drastic, dramatic, where maybe they're feeling social pressures that they can't just walk away and leave from it. And so they take on Stoicism, it seems, as a coping mechanism. Maybe it's not correlative, but I just find it interesting that most of the time when I see people start saying that suddenly they're into Stoicism and they start reading books about it and everything, it's often, somebody that just went through a huge life change for whatever reason, be it having a kid or something like that. And I get it. Stoicism does allow for, it is a good coping, or not good, but it is an effective coping mechanism for saying, okay, yeah, just think about the future. You'll get through this. It's going to be okay. You don't have to, go for the delayed gratification or whatever, and then you can move on. So I find it fascinating where hedonism gets, or should I say Stoicism gets applied, or hedonism gets pushed away, either in ancient life and in modern life, and when it seems to crop up, and and especially how Stoicism will crop up, in a lot of these situations. I just feel like it's yeah, but you see, you're proving why Stoicism is a problem, because really the issue isn't that you don't have Stoicism in your life. The issue is that you made a choice that you might be second guessing right now. That might be a real, a real issue. And you're trying to maybe ex post facto justify, why you're going to, deal with the pain of going through whatever whatever it happens to be it, raising a child or stewarding a child, I should say, or something like this. So, I mean, that's just a perspective of mine. It's perhaps anecdotal, so take it for what you will. But, that's another little thing that I see, that this is where Stoicism seems to crop up, in modern life. Now, it's not true for everybody. I don't think it's true for you, Nick. I can think of a lot of people that I don't think it's true for. But it does seem to happen often enough. Anyway, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess from my anecdotal evidence, I guess I don't see. I don't know that many Stoics, honestly.
Sure.
But I guess I can find both examples that you're talking about, and it's interesting because I got interested in Stoicism because of struggles that I was having, and that's typically where those practices come out when I'm about to do something that I don't want to do.
Right.
I look at it. Well, obstacle is the way, Nick.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And I like that. That's something that it works for me, and yeah, I came from my life struggles. That's when it really started. Is I was just not feeling very happy, and some things happened in my life that I was not dealing with well, and I heard about Stoicism from Bill Buford and Brett Veinotte or something, and And then I started working that in, and it seemed to help me. So that's where I definitely got it from, struggle. And I think that was, it was a useful, it was effective, in solving a lot of those issues, but I did find, fairly quickly that there were other issues that Stoicism did not, solve, and there were some issues that Stoicism, at least my practice of it, created, right? So I found that, shoving down emotions and kind of bottling emotions, that's something that Stoics can do pretty easily. It's somewhat natural. At least for me, it was very natural. It's a coping strategy that I've used
Sure.
quite a bit, and so it was natural for me to do that. And Stoicism, most Stoics are not very aware of that, so you don't really get that warning, that says, "Hey, wait, you got to consider emotions. Don't throw them out the window, dude, because you can't. They're still going to be there." So I was lucky to have other influences pushing me towards like nonviolent communication and things like that. So I think that if you're going to be a practicing Stoic, that you should be also practicing practices of other more empathetic kind of, I guess, ideas, philosophies, whether it be NVC or something similar, right? Because I think that's very important to recognize too.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up NVC because, like NVC, one of the things that appealed to me about that, even though I pretty much, if anyone ever listens to my shows or anything or my posts online, I never use it. But
Yeah.
but I'm a big supporter of it. And like my favorite book from NVC was The Surprising Purpose of Anger by Marshall Rosenberg. Most NVC books are by him. And in that, that was the thing that shocked me about NVC was that, most of these kind of self-help and, all these different, programs, or not that NVC is a program, but, a lot of these different styles that you can attribute or take on, a lot of these different, maybe, I don't want to call it an ideology, but practices, whatever. Usually they're like, oh yeah, think positive thoughts, right? I mean, even Stoicism can kind of fall into this. Not that it's think positive thoughts, but like you said, kind of bury this away, go full Mr. Spock and, go forward. Like I know I heard Bill Buper talking about Stoicism, and he even said, he's like, yeah, that his family often calls him a Vulcan or something like that, right? But with that book, The Surprising Purpose of Anger, like he talks about how no, anger is just like, it's just a warning bell. It's a klaxon going off. And you want to stop and assess and figure out what's going on, but it's just a sign that needs aren't getting met. And he wasn't saying don't feel it. And that's what was so amazing with NVC, with nonviolent communication to me, was that it wasn't saying don't feel the anger, just recognize it for what it is and what's actually going on, and that it needs to be addressed. I mean, if you got to step away for 15 minutes, and then come back to be able to, more calmly address the situation, fine. But, that these, that emotions are something to integrate. They are, they are telling you something. And that you don't want to stuff them away, and that was a very interesting thing for me with NVC, and it was one of the original appeals was because it was one of the rare instances, one of the rare cases like things like NVC are where it actually said that no, anger's okay, so. Yeah, I like your approach that's saying, I mean, it sounds like what I'm hearing anyway, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is that Stoicism is one tool, one method, but there's others that you should have in your toolkit. Am I right in that?
Yes, that is exactly how I would explain it. That's exactly how I have, yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, and I can really get that. And I know we're again, you and I think it's fair to say we're both fans of Brett, Brett Veinotte of School Sucks, we mentioned earlier. And he constantly says on his show, that, well, take what's useful from something and leave the rest behind. And, and I can agree with that. And where I start railing against Stoicism is because, like I said, I think there's some principles like in the Enchiridion and some other things that are fantastic, that are wonderful to attribute to your life. But when I start hearing people just kind of like broadly talking about Stoicism, suddenly like my concern, becomes that, well, people are going to see this. No one's exactly explaining what Stoicism is. And so somebody's going to like look at perhaps a thought leader or something like this and say, oh, okay, well, they're doing Stoicism, so I'll start attributing Stoicism, to myself. Or they'll read this one great book about Stoicism. I can't remember the title of it. There is a modern book that I know a lot of people that have really been excited about.
Ryan Holiday's book, I'm sure. I don't remember what it's called either. For some reason,
yes. Yeah, that's the one. So, and it's not a terrible book, but like the thing is that my concern is that people, and maybe this is more me, because maybe what's happening is that I'm like attributing what I do onto other people. Like when I get interested in something, I mean, I am, I'm diving off the 20-foot ladder. I mean, like I am so in, and I take in everything that I could possibly, read about it and, integrate about it and everything. And so maybe I'm attributing that to other people, because what I get concerned with the Stoicism is not that they just make it one tool in their toolkit, but like that they go all out. And I know, myself from my own research, like that historically, like there's a lot of things in there that in my opinion are frankly dangerous and antithetical to human freedom, some of which you already addressed, like these concepts of duty and obligation and all that, that just don't make any sense, but they're there. They're a major part of it. And maybe most people aren't taking that part on, when it comes to Stoicism. But then I guess, I don't know whether or not they're, that they're doing that. So.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people can be that way, where we jump head in and become so involved. And I don't know, honestly, how often that happens. I know it just didn't happen with me. I'm not somebody who likes to read books, and Stoicism, the only way you can really learn about the whole philosophy is reading books, because there's very few, I guess, podcasts. That's usually how I get my information. So I just got lucky, There's very few people talking about it. So I only kind of got to pick out, well, I liked what that guy said, and, they say all these nice things about it, and I don't really read much. But I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting concern, and I think that, I don't know. I definitely see it happen with, I don't know about Stoicism. I'm not involved in, like, the Stoic circles as much as I am, like, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist. Right. And that happens in the libertarian circles. It happened to me, definitely, in that regard. But that's interesting, because I think it's, because let me say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to remember, is I think that everybody should be looking at things as, if it doesn't make sense, throw it out. If it doesn't work, throw it out. But everything it does, hey, keep it. I think that's the healthy approach to tackle most philosophies, at least.
Sure, right. Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. And I don't know if this is going to turn anybody off, but whatever. So something that I heard about a few years ago when I first started getting into, libertarianism, anarchism, all that. I heard a lot about the trivium. Okay. And, and I know a lot of people are big fans of it, and in the abstract, I get it. And like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. You want to know what's being said is actually true. And, I mean, that's very basic. There's a lot more to it than that. So, but when I first heard the word, I was like, okay, I did what I always do. I nosedive, and it's like, okay, let's find out. All right, what is there all to know about this? And when, like something I like to do personally, I like to get into the books of it all. And when I tried to go and find the books about the trivium, the only thing I could find was a book from like the early 20th century by Sister Miriam Joseph. And I'm like, whoa, I'm, instantly seeing Catholicism. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. What the hell is this? What does this have to do with people that I know are, either full on atheists or at least very logical people, et cetera. And then the other books, all of these books, it's all written by Catholics. It's all like this, this stuff that clearly somehow, I mean, and it's ironic too, because you would think that based upon how the trivium is marketed, at least in libertarian and anarchist circles, that you would assume that if somebody really applied the trivium, that they would recognize, hey, the Catholic Church is this, terrible social structure. This is crazy, and that they'd come out of it. But instead, for hundreds of years, it was, effectively kind of the schooling system, within Catholicism. So my point in bringing that up is that, like, people toss out these words, say the trivium, say even Stoicism and things like this. And, what one person defines these things as, like say the trivium, would not, like the trivium as defined by some people in libertarianism would have nothing to do with Catholicism really. But you're not going to find that content. You're not like, when you go to Google, you're not going to find, or at least a few years ago, this was true. Maybe now it's changed. But, at the time, the only thing you're going to find is a bunch of stuff from, Sister Miriam Joseph, and you're going to find a bunch of Catholic stuff. And it's like, but you're promoting this like term. And so that's kind of the danger, is that when there's not enough explanation and there's not enough or even just admission that, well, this is what it means to me. And, this is how I'm applying it in my life or something like this. People are going to, they're going to look around and they're going to find all this, crazy stuff. And I worry, you're going to turn people off. And I mean, not you about Stoicism, but I'm just speaking in general in the abstract, that you're going to turn people off to what may be a fantastic idea, but because, it has this certain history and, and things like this, I wonder what's even perhaps the usefulness, of that sort of word. I mean, I run into this problem with hedonism as well, because, well, I'll ask you, Nick, I mean, when you hear the word hedonism, what's the first thing that kind of comes to your mind?
Giant orgies.
Yeah, right. Right. Sure. So drinking, drugs, all that stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's immediately what comes to mind.
Yeah. So now I'm not going to speak about the orgies, but the drinking and drugs, I don't do any of that. I'm a total teetotaler. All right. But, but honestly, also at the same time, especially in kind of, I guess you could say the circles that we run in, people will say, well, when they think hedonism, what do they think? And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying a lot of people think of me first thing, and so there's that disconnect there. And that's something I have to constantly wrestle with is hedonism is this good thing. But then everybody's like, wait a minute, but you don't drink and do drugs. I mean, the sex stuff, I certainly, that's another, like I said, it's another subject. But, yeah, I mean, this is a problem that comes up with any of these terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a problem with semantics, right? It's hard
Sure.
it's hard to use just one word to describe so many ideas. And like I said earlier, that it's you really have to take a nuanced approach, but it's hard to do. Because before I had because I've been thinking about hedonism recently, and there was a show with, I think it was Carlos Morales on the Libertarian Atheist podcast where they brought it up, and that's kind of where I got the introduction to hedonism. Mm-hmm. And from there I kind of had this negative connotation, but then recently, after I invited you on the show, I've been thinking about it, and I'm thinking, well, because I don't know a whole lot about you, Brian, but from listening to you on the things that I have, you didn't really strike me as somebody who is who's living a life that's not very what's the word? I think substantive is what's coming to my mind, because that's really what comes to mind. Is it's a hedonist is somebody who's really only chasing pleasure, and then that sounds like, well, I think that if we, depending on how we define pleasure and what kind of pleasure we're talking about, hey, I'm doing the same thing, but it appears to me that what comes to mind with hedonism is it's very shallow, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, as soon as I was like, wow, Brian, I just kind of realized, well, Brian's a hedonist, and I know the way he talks and what he does, he's not somebody who's, wasting his life as what, that's something that would come to mind with hedonism too. So I was like, well, okay, it's got to be different. There's got to be something there that I'm missing. So that's interesting, because it absolutely happens with those words. You have these negative connotations, and just because of what you hear, right? So that's interesting. I guess I want to ask is, how have you used hedonism or these practices that you've grabbed from it to better your life?
Sure, absolutely. Well, so, probably the main thing is just that, what ends up being your happiness. Now, okay, so well, let me back up just a touch. So really, for me, hedonism, ethical hedonism, starts off with the understanding that the way that any action that, or generally any action that people take, or an action that is, you got to be careful with the word healthy, but, as a healthy action generally comes from enlightened self-interest. Okay. Like altruism is not a thing. That's nonsense. If people want to read Ayn Rand about that, I definitely, she has her problems, but she also says a lot of really great things. So, all of these actions come from enlightened self-interest. And I think when you recognize the core of what you're doing, that even when you're doing something that, to the average person seems like, oh, it's so nice you did that for that person, all that stuff. Yeah, you did do that for that person, but, it came out of, you looking for your own joy in doing something for somebody else. My favorite definition of love is from Robert Heinlein, which is, love is when your happiness is intertwined with someone else's. And of course, he's talking about romantic love, but I think that can be applied in a lot of different ways. And so, how it's applied in my life is that, like, I recognize, I never really sacrificed because, like I said, I've been in the military. I've been in, horrible family situations. I've there's parts of my life I absolutely wish, that I could forget. But the only thing that really gave me in many ways, the strength, to get out of those horrendous situations was not looking off to the future, like saying it'll be better then. I just got to get through this now or something like that. It was in saying to myself, no, your goal in life is to be happy. And if this is not making you happy, you need to stop right now. Just full stop, and you need to get away from it and go. And that's, that, like, and we don't tell people enough that that's okay. We spend so much time telling people that, oh yeah, just stick through it and all this stuff, where really it is okay to just stop or to just walk away. That's the nature of freedom, is to have options, and to have choice and all of this. So, recognizing that things come from that enlightened self-interest, and that's okay, to think about yourself when you're choosing things, kind of like Ayn Rand says, the virtue of selfishness. Good things still come out of that. I love to help people, because I feel good about it. I enjoy it, and it's so helpful to say that that's okay to think about you, in everything that you're doing, in life. So hedonism, just applying that and just recognizing that and just saying to yourself that it's okay to be happy. And, unfortunately, you don't want to hurt anybody else. You never do, because you wouldn't want to be hurt. Right. It's interesting. A lot of people wouldn't think of it, but, kind of the golden rule or the platinum rule, depending on which way you want to define it, really is, a hedonistic principle, because you have an understanding of pleasure and what pleases you, and so you really don't want to do that to other people when you really accept, that it's not just these, base or, shallow pleasures that we're talking about when we're talking about more of, life fulfillment and all that. It's very helpful. I don't know exactly if I explained that the best, but that's what it's done for me. It's just that it's given me the permission to get out of, situations that were not conducive, to my own, to happiness, to the human condition, to my own growth, and might have even been harmful to others. Who knows?
Well, God damn it, I think I'm a hedonist. So I think you explained that very well. I think that's, okay. It's a very agreeable thing. I come at this from the same position. The main thing I like from the objectivists and Ayn Rand is that virtue of selfishness, and that's very unpopular, but I think I was just talking to my dad about this today, about how everybody is an egoist. Right? You just can't get around it. Just some people pretend not to be. And I agree with that entirely. And I think that approach that's the kind of the approach that when it gets down to the basics, that's what I'm trying to do with my life. So that's really interesting to hear. That makes me have it gives me what's the word? I'm trying to be more specific than saying better, but it's a better outlook on hedonism, I guess. So that's very interesting.
Sure.
I guess that's something I would really like to see more of, is more people understanding what makes me happy and then doing that. Because I don't know, it just seems very fundamental to me that's, why else? Why else live life if you're not going to be happy? If it's going to suck, why do it? And like I can get where, you can kind of hide that, using your beliefs in religion, especially Christianity, it's a religion filled with messages about sacrifice, and I really don't like that. And I think that people really underplay selfishness or kind of disparage it and I largely think it is because of Christianity, and its hegemony throughout, the Western world, especially that's the idea of selfishness is, people just don't like it. But when it comes
it's
down
vilified.
to it, but it comes down to it, like people who I think, at least just in my experience, maybe I shouldn't say, I guess I don't really know about most objectivist or egoist or whatever it is, it's the same issue with using any, grouping anybody together. There's always going to be rotten apples, but, at least in my experience, that's made me actually a much kinder person. I'm not hiding my pleasure or, I'm not trying to not be happy. Does that make sense? I don't know. But, I'm kinder because I'm not bottling, up harmful emotions and trying to avoid certain ones, right? I'm just,
well, that's the thing.
A more compassionate person because I'm just happier, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is that, like, even compassion. I mean, like a lot of these things, like for a guy, honestly, like well, here, let me ask you this question. You just tell me what your answer is. Like, what's the one emotion that it's okay for a guy to feel?
Anger.
Yeah, right. See? Now, whether or not you agree with the premise of that question, you knew the answer because it's a societal norm, right?
Right.
And so, a lot of these things, like even guys feeling compassion, like you're talking about, which I think is absolutely beautiful, and I know I often come off as like a very angry guy, but I'm actually one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in your life. I mean, no patting myself on the back or anything, but you don't get permission. Like so many of these things, you get no permission whatsoever to even be allowed to feel these things, and it goes from the emotions that you can express all the way down to just quite simply, can you go forward and be happy? I mean, and honestly, I would argue that like if, especially like with guys, if the norm for guys is the one thing you're allowed to feel is to be angry, well, obviously you're not allowed to feel happiness. I mean, some people could get into like crazy town and, get into extreme examples and say, well, what if angry, makes somebody happy or something like that? Well, I mean, that's a whole other conversation because that's getting into a lot of other psychological issues, I think. But yeah, I mean that it's a real problem that there's so much repression. It's nobody is told, look, it's okay, to feel that sort of thing. It's okay to do that. It's okay to think about yourself and all this. And so that that's for me again why I like to toss out the word hedonism often. I mean, and to some degree too, like the fact that people when they like say see me talking about hedonism or something like that, and they're going, wait a second, that word doesn't seem to fit or something like that. That's also a conversation starter, and that could be nice too. I mean, look at this. I ended up on a podcast here. Yeah. So that's all right. Sometimes using, a charged word or a word with a lot of baggage can actually be, advantageous, certainly. But yeah, you sound like a hedonist to me, Nick. So, welcome to the dark side. And, we'll go have some Johnny Walker Black or something. And I don't know.
Yeah. So, man, I agree with what you just said there a lot. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And then I want to share this, unless you have anything else you want to add to that.
No, please.
Cause I don't know, I've been studying philosophy for a while and I'm trying to like piece it all together. It's very hard and I've relaxed on it. But, yeah, I came out like when I was trying to build my little philosophy and, make it all consistent. I'm like, well, how does Stoicism fit in here? Cause I still really like it. When I was looking at it and I just decided, like, I don't know how I came up with this exactly, but I still use it and I still find pleasure in it because I think that I'm, like we brought up earlier, taking the tools out of it. Some parts, just leave it. Don't even touch that because, I don't need that in my life. But,
right.
Yeah, some of it's very helpful. So that's where I kind of come at Stoicism this is a way that helps me. At least these tools that I've gained from it have helped me live a more happy and joy-filled life. But, And I think that it's going to be different for everybody. Some things are just not going to work for you, but I think that, as a very basic, I guess, strategy, I think that pursuing happiness you're gonna be happy, right? That's the thing. That just seems kind of like that's just true in and of itself, right? That's by definition, right? If you're bad at going after happiness, you're not going to be happy, but
Right.
But if you apply a reasonable strategy to get there, that your goal of reaching happiness, I think that's important. So I really like that piece of that.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'll tell you, like, one of the things, this is actually out of the Enchiridion that I really liked was, like one of the, I don't know if maxim is the right term, but, one of the principles within it that it kind of talked about that I think is it goes into like saying, kind of ascribe this certain character to yourself and, and be that in secret and wherever else. And it's really like, it's kind of just a message of saying, like, figure out who the hell you are. And, and then go forward and stick to it, stick to your principles and all of this stuff. And, when you read something like that, like that's great. That's fantastic. It's like, oh, of course I want to internalize this sort of thing, and that character that you've ascribed to yourself is something that is ready, whatever life throws at you. Like, ideas like that, I think are absolutely wonderful. So there, there's things to take away from it, that I think are great. Certainly. And so I guess maybe my hope is that people get, more particular in the way they describe it. And, and because I like the way you're saying it, that it's a part of your toolkit. It's a tool, it's not everything. As to where kind of historically it is meant to be everything, like it is your total outlook on life and all of this. And yeah, I think if people said, this is one of my tools, like I'd be like, yeah, okay, I got you. Like I get it. It's just, it's an aspect. So.
Sure. Cool. Well, I'm trying to think of other questions to ask, but I think we covered that pretty well. I'm quite happy with how it went. I was hoping there'd be a little bit more disagreement, but yeah, I just thought like, nah, we're going to agree pretty much on this. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help that we're both really nice guys. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we should have been calling each other names like in the first 5 minutes. Then it would have been.
Exactly. You damn hedonist. Yeah, no. I don't know. That makes it interesting because I challenged you just to a debate on Facebook, but yeah, I don't like to debate people. It doesn't.
Sure.
It's just not my style. So yeah. Unless you have any other thoughts.
Well, I guess I have one more to just quick to add on, and because I like that how you're describing that you're doing a lot of research into philosophy and kind of going back on the history of it. At least that's what I was hearing, and I think that's a great thing for people to do. I think it should be pointed out that hedonism and the hedonists that have existed for thousands of years. I mean, and really hedonism is, honestly, it's the first philosophy you can ever read about, like out of Sumerian texts and Egyptian texts and all that. Like, you don't read about Stoicism, you read about hedonism. So, I mean, I could go so far as to say it's the first philosophy or something like that, though I'm sure people would want to argue with me about that one. But it's tough to find like a cohesive whole about hedonism, which is maybe why more people don't take it on as an aspect of themselves or as the core of their being or something, outside of kind of the colloquialism way that it gets used, where it's, a bunch of drunkards and all that stuff, which really has nothing to do with hedonism, at the end of the day. I mean, it's important to understand, and this is kind of an attractive thing for me about hedonism, is that, most of the works about hedonism, the very, academic philosophical texts about hedonism for thousands of years, I mean, most of them have been burned. Like they don't exist anymore, because like I was saying earlier in the show, like every major religion said, no, don't, this is bad. And so, they were in control of the transmission of information at various points in time. And so they made sure that nobody could get their hands on it. So it's kind of sad that I think there's a lot to explore within hedonism. I mean, there's the basic stuff that we covered here. But there's a lot more to it. And unfortunately, you can't find it because you knew it was there. Like there's scraps of things, from hedonists, like one of my favorite hedonist sayings from a few thousand years ago now was that whether laws existed or not, a wise man would live the same life. It's like, yeah, okay, so there you go. You figured out anarchism. I could see why that would be dangerous. Mm-hmm. And and a lot of these, a lot of the texts that you want to find about it, I mean, just sadly, they're just gone, and it's such a pity. So it's even tough to debate hedonism at times, because like when you want to like look at finer points, like we could go over Marcus Aurelius's Meditations or something and go line by line and cover a lot of the stuff. And other than maybe a couple works by Epicurus or something, you couldn't do that with hedonism. So it's even a tough thing to debate. But fortunately, I think when people really hear about it, they kind of, I think it has a natural appeal, because I would argue that just like anarchism, it's kind of the natural state, of humans, is to want to be happy, and to pursue that happiness. Anyway, I could go on and on about a lot of that stuff, but that's just a point I wanted to bring up, that if people do want to look more into hedonism, after listening to this, I hate to say it, it's tough to find information because it's all been burned. But at the same time, I think that says a lot about hedonism. And I don't think it's a negative thing either. I think it says a lot of positive things, that that kind of that these texts that we knew existed are just gone. So anyway, that's the last I have to say on it.
Sure. Yeah, that's very interesting. And it's too bad that there's not any works, but I think that it's somewhat easy to grok. At least my understanding of it makes sense.
It is. So. Yeah, it is. It is.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining me, Brian. This was really fun, and I'm very happy with how this went.
Yeah, no, same here. It was great being on, and happy to do it again. Some point, got to get you on my show. We'll figure out a way to get you on. So I know you're not a tech guy, but then you can tell people how to live without tech. It'd be amazing. So, because maybe that's what people really need to do to find that happiness.
Yes, absolutely. Well, tell us where we can find your work again, and of course it'll be linked in the show notes. But people, check that out, and I'm gonna have to listen to a couple episodes.
Yeah. Well, I like to make it informative and entertaining at the same time. Very high energy show. And if anybody wants to check it out, of course, just go to sovryntech.com. It's SOVRYN tech.com. And you can find everything there, even though it's a Patreon page. All the sounds, except for the Patreon sounds, the sounds are there for free. But if you want to become a patron too, hey, rock and roll.
Cool.